This is a crazy story that I wouldn't have believed had it not happened to me. I am not prone or drawn to the supernatural, and in fact have a strong Christian support system. But what I experienced has no other explanation than the unexplained. This is a true story about a rubber ducky. I don't feel that in good conscience I can keep this thing in my house. It wouldn't be fair to my family, and frankly, I've lost enough sleep over it as it is. I spoke at length with my pastor, and together we came up with the idea to sell it with full disclosure. Any other method, and we would risk the duck falling into unsuspecting hands. We knew that the only way to get rid of him without personal condemnation was to be open, honest, and forthright. We knew the person getting the duck would have to know the whole story and accept the consequences freely. We felt the only way to do this was to be sure the story would be read, understood, and accepted. So, here it is. My son, now 2 years old, received this rubber ducky as a gift from an aunt when he was approximately 10 or 11 months old. He was very enthusiastic about his bath time and loved the new addition to the tub. He named the duck Yella, his personal pronunciation of yellow and, of course, the color of the duck. Now, as with most kids, their tastes change and can be at times fickle. In fact, suggesting that all kids have some level of ADD would not be a stretch. Soon, Yella had lost his appeal in the eyes of my son. He requested the duck's company less and less as time wore on, until such a time where Yella was all but forgotten. We originally thought nothing of it. Then as time went on, my son began to speak more, and was able to articulate his thoughts as he started preferring more and more to his old friend Yella. The problem was that it wasn't in a positive or childish manner. In fact, it was really quite disturbing. He repeatedly made reference to fights he and Yella had, and a subsequent scar inflicted on the left side of the duck's head. At first, we just figured he had an active imagination and eventually he would forget about Yella, but he never did. In fact, each time he told the story, he did it with more detail and more emotion until his mother and I finally forbade him from telling the story at all. In fact, my wife was so distressed she searched out the duck and vowed to dispose of it. At this point, our son had an unnerving attachment to Yella. He would never let the duck out of his sight. He was never affectionate towards the duck. He just insisted that the toy always be around no matter what. He was about 1.5 years now, and there was certainly no bargaining with him. Every time we tried to take the toy, our son would lose it, literally screaming bloody murder. Needless to say, there was no way of coaxing the duck away, and despite our best efforts, the stories continued. We hoped and prayed that his obsession with Yella would pass. We even found ourselves spoiling him in an effort to replace the duck. It was useless. One night, our son and Yella were having a bath together with several of the other toys collected over the course of the previous year. There was a boat, a whale, a starfish, a small action figure, and some miscellaneous plastic tools. Our son's overall interest in Yella had dwindled to the point of sheer indifference. In fact, if he had his way, the duck wouldn't have even been in the tub. Instead, it was because of his mother's lapse in judgment that Yella was included at all. He went about playing and splashing with his other toys, all the while ignoring the duck, intentionally or not. It was at this point our son noticed the other toys in the tub changing shape, distorting and losing their color in the water. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew something wasn't right. He also noticed that Yella was eerily positioned at the end of the tub, dead center and facing him directly. He also noticed the duck's shape hadn't changed, and his color appeared to be as bright as ever. It seemed as though the toys were melting before him. It was at this point he reached out to grab the duck, almost mesmerized by his yellow body. As he grabbed the duck, he felt a piercing pain in the palm of his hand and immediately threw the toy back into the water. He was sure he had been bitten. Anger flooded our son, and again he grabbed at Yella, and this time he wasted no time in throwing the duck across the room. The duck crashed against the raised corner of the toilet paper holder, bounced off the wall, and came to rest at my feet, as I now stood in the doorway of the bathroom. By now, my wife was aware of our son's rage, and the events taking place. She threw down her magazine, jumped off her stool, and lunged across the washroom to our son. She scooped him up into her arms. My wife and I looked at each other as we tried desperately to process the evidence before us, all while our little one cried and shouted at the rubber ducky on the floor. As I mentioned before, if it had not happened to us, I would have never given it a second thought, and I certainly would have dismissed the author as a quack and the story as farce. We immediately checked the temperature of the water. It was lukewarm. We searched the bathroom high and low for chemicals or agents that may have caused this reaction in the toys, but nothing was found. Our son was not burned, and, with the exception of a small cut on the palm of his hand, there was no sign of injury. Being cautious, we packed our son in the car and headed for the emergency room. As expected, nothing was found to be abnormal. We then rushed to the home of our pastor. We've never been fanatical with respect to our religious beliefs, but we felt like there was something unholy and unexplainable here that needed to be addressed. Our pastor assured us there had to be an earthly explanation, but at the same time he had an unsettled look that left us feeling doubtful. We left and headed home, exhausted and anxious to put this night behind us. At home, we rushed upstairs to our son's room, got him into his pajamas, and said our goodnight prayers. Our son seemed distant and agitated, but soon relented to his own exhaustion. My wife and I returned downstairs to the main floor bathroom and the scene of that evening's events. Everything was as we left it, with one exception. Yella was back in the tub, dead center and facing us directly. We looked at each other in the hope that the other would appear calm and composed, but it didn't happen. Instead, we stared at each other, waiting for an acknowledgement of who had put the duck back in the tub. That didn't happen either. I immediately grabbed up the duck and without hesitation placed him in the closest container I could find. A Tupperware-style container on the counter in the kitchen. I then stormed out to the garage and tossed the container on the workbench, while I headed back into the house to try and comprehend what had just happened. It was at this point I picked up the phone and called our pastor. And now, we find ourselves in the position we are in today. I can't explain what happened, and the sooner I can put the events of that night and this duck behind me, the better off I'll be. I will not be responsible for the duck after shipping. I will not field questions or help to explain its unusual mystique. I want nothing to do with it. The winning bidder must understand this. I don't want someone to find this thing in a dumpster or buy it at a garage sale. I want the person who gets it to understand what they have, and not to take it lightly, and for God's sake, I don't want it near children. I'd be just as happy if you buried it in the Tupperware container it's still in. I hope you can respect my wishes. Thank you.